I never imagined the day would come when my own daughter would walk past me like I was a stranger. I raised her with every piece of my heart, working double shifts at a diner, skipping meals so she could have her school lunches, staying up at night sewing her prom dress by hand. But that night, when she stepped out of that black SUV wearing a designer coat and diamond earrings, she didn't even look at me. The girl who once clung to my arm when thunder scared her now looked through me like I didn't exist. I called her name, but her friends laughed, pretending not to hear. My hands trembled as I stood in the cold, holding the gift I had wrapped for her birthday, a framed photo of the two of us from the year she graduated. She had everything now, the job, the fame, the money. And somewhere in her eyes, she forgot the woman who built her world from nothing. Where are you watching this video from? And what time is it there right now? Tell me in the comments. I used to think love could hold a family together no matter what life threw at us. Maybe that's what every young mother believes when she's still full of hope and sleep-deprived dreams. Back then, I was just 23, working the morning shift at a small-town diner in Ohio, with a belly that felt heavier than the world itself. Her father had already left by then, claiming he wasn't ready to be a dad. He packed up his guitar, promised he'd call soon, and vanished like morning fog. I remember sitting on that worn-out couch the night after he left, hands on my stomach, whispering to the baby that it would still be okay, that she would still be loved. I named her Lily because even before she was born, she felt like a small flower trying to bloom through concrete. When Lily arrived, my world became smaller but fuller. Every cry, every giggle, every diaper change felt like a tiny piece of purpose stitched into my day. Money was tight, but love was constant. I worked double shifts at the diner, sometimes coming home after midnight smelling like grease and coffee, my feet swollen and my eyes burning. I would quietly peek into her crib before washing up, and every single time I saw her little chest rise and fall, I'd whisper, "You're worth it." Those words carried me through years I barely survived. As Lily grew, life didn't get easier, it just changed shape. Rent kept climbing, gas prices kept biting into my paycheck, and sometimes dinner was whatever I could piece together from the leftovers I brought home. But she never saw the struggle. I made sure of that. I wanted her to believe we were okay, that life was kind, that the world would always meet her with open arms. When she was 8, I saved for months to buy her a second-hand laptop because she wanted to become a designer. She used to draw on sticky notes and tape them on the fridge, saying one day people would wear her clothes. I believed her. I still do. When high school came, the world around her started shifting. Kids had iPhones, brand shoes, and perfect smiles for Instagram. I saw her trying to fit in, hiding the scuffed sneakers I bought from Goodwill, turning down offers to hang out because she couldn't afford the same things as her friends. I tried everything to make her feel equal, taking extra shifts, picking up cleaning jobs at night, but I could see the quiet embarrassment in her eyes. That hurt more than any exhaustion ever could. Still, I never blamed her. I just kept working. Love makes you do that. It convinces you that every sacrifice is worth it if your child smiles, even for a moment. By her senior year, Lily had become everything I once dreamed she'd be: smart, confident, and so beautiful that people turned when she walked into a room. When she got accepted into a design school in New York, I cried like someone had handed me the world. But the joy was followed by a kind of ache I can't describe, the kind you feel when you realize your reason for breathing is about to leave home. I remember standing outside the bus station the day she left, pretending to be excited while my hands clutched the handle of her suitcase too long. She hugged me and said she'd call every night. I believed her. That's the thing about mothers, we always believe. For the first few weeks, she did call. She'd tell me about her classes, her professors, the friends she was making. Her voice sounded alive, like the city had poured something electric into her veins. But soon the calls became shorter. Then they became texts. Then they stopped altogether. I told myself she was just busy, chasing her dreams, the same way I used to chase paychecks. But there's a silence that doesn't come from busyness. It comes from distance, from growing apart in a way that has nothing to do with miles. I could feel it creeping in like a draft through a cracked window. The last time she called me before everything changed, she said, "Mom, don't worry if I don't pick up often. Things are getting serious here. I have to focus." Her voice was polite but cold, like she was talking to someone she owed respect to, not someone she owed her heart to. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone, trying not to cry. That same phone had been the bridge that connected us for years, and suddenly, it felt like a wall. I started following her Instagram to feel closer to her. That was my mistake, because the more I scrolled, the more I felt like I didn't exist in her world. She was posting pictures at rooftop parties, photo shoots, red carpets, and fancy restaurants, always smiling, always glowing. Her captions talked about independence, finding yourself, breaking free from the past. I wondered if I was part of that past she was breaking free from. My hands would shake every time I saw someone comment, "You're such an inspiration." I wanted to write, "That's my daughter," but I never did. Somehow, I felt like I no longer had the right. Months turned into a year, and I stopped expecting her calls. Birthdays passed quietly, with a single cupcake and a candle. I'd scroll scroll through old photos, trying to remember the sound of her laugh when she was little. Sometimes I'd record voice notes, just talking about my day, and send them to her. She never replied. Still, I couldn't stop. That's what motherhood does. It keeps giving even when there's nothing left to give. Then one day, I saw her on TV, not as a designer, but as the face of her own brand. She was being interviewed about her journey, talking about how she built everything from scratch. I stood there in my small living room, my hands covered in dish soap, watching my daughter speak like she had raised herself from nothing. She didn't mention me. Not once. Not the nights I stayed up sewing her clothes. Not the jobs I worked to keep her in school. Not even a simple thank you. Just I worked hard. I made it. I turned off the TV and sat on the couch in silence. The world saw a success story. I saw a stranger wearing my daughter's face. That night, I cried in a way I hadn't in years. Not the loud kind, but the kind that breaks you quietly. The kind that makes you question every sacrifice you ever made. I kept wondering what I had done wrong, where I had failed her, how love could turn invisible so fast. But deep down, I knew this was the price of giving everything. Sometimes when you give too much, people forget they ever needed you. The next morning, I woke up to a message from a friend who had seen the same interview. She said, "You must be so proud." I typed back, "Yes, I am," and then deleted it. I just couldn't lie, not even in a text. Pride was supposed to feel warm, but all I felt was cold. That was the beginning of the silence, the long, endless silence that made me realize my daughter didn't just move away, she moved on. It was a cold February morning when I saw the first sign that something inside me had finally given up on hoping. It was Lily's 26th birthday. For weeks, I'd been saving tips from the diner, folding $5 bills into a small tin box I kept behind the flour bag in the kitchen. I wanted to send her something that would mean more than money, something that would remind her where she came from, who she was before the lights and cameras. I went to the local thrift shop, found an old wooden frame, sanded it down myself, and placed inside it our photo from her high school graduation, the one where she was laughing, wearing her cap crooked, and I was holding her so tightly, like letting go might make her disappear. I wrapped it carefully in brown paper, tied it with a ribbon, and wrote her a letter that I must have rewritten a dozen times. I told her I missed her, that I was proud of her, that no matter how far she went, she'd always have a home here. I took it to the post office, paid extra for express shipping, and walked home through the snow, my fingers numb but my heart full. I imagined her opening it and maybe calling me, even for a minute, to say thank you. That would have been enough. Just hearing her voice again. Days passed, then a week, then two. No call, no text, no post. I kept checking the tracking number until one afternoon it showed delivered. I waited the whole night by the phone. Nothing. By morning, I told myself maybe she was busy, maybe she'd call later. But deep down, I felt something I hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't coming back, not even with her voice. A few days later, I was wiping tables at the diner when a coworker, Jenny, came rushing in with her phone out. "Isn't this your daughter?" she asked, shoving the screen toward me. It was a story from a celebrity blog. Young designer Lily Porter celebrates her birthday in Beverly Hills. There she was, smiling, surrounded by flashing lights, balloons shaped like dollar signs, and a crowd of people I didn't recognize. I looked closely, and there it was. The gift I sent her wasn't in her hands. Instead, she was holding a glass of champagne, posing next to a man twice her age who the article said was her business partner. I smiled at Jenny, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending I was just proud. I excused myself, went to the restroom, and locked the door. I leaned against the cold wall and tried to breathe. That's when it hit me, not just sadness, but something heavier. It was like all those years of love and sacrifice had collapsed into one moment of silence. My daughter wasn't just far away. She was gone, and I didn't even know when I lost her. That night after my shift, I went home and scrolled through her birthday photos. Hundreds of comments filled the screen. "You deserve it all. So proud of you. Can't believe how far you've come." I wanted to write something too. I typed, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Love you always." Then I noticed something that stopped me cold. There was no add comment button. I refreshed the page again and again until I realized she had restricted me. My own daughter. My hands shook as I set my phone down. I felt like the ground beneath me had given way. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just hollow. Like someone had taken every sound from the world and left only silence. I walked into the kitchen and made myself tea just to have something to do, but even the kettle's whistle felt too loud. I sat at the table, staring at the same photo I had framed for her, the copy I'd kept for myself. I looked at her smile, at how young and full of trust she looked back then, and I whispered, "Where did you go, me baby?" The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called her, straight to voicemail. I left a message, voice trembling, telling her I hoped she liked the gift. I didn't mention the blocked comments. I didn't ask why she hadn't called. I just said, "I love you, always." Then I hung up. She never called back. The following week, the diner got slow. Fewer customers, fewer tips. Inflation was hitting everyone hard, and some nights we barely made enough to keep the lights on. My rent was due in 4 days, and the landlord landlord had already left a warning note under my door. Still, I couldn't stop myself from checking Lily's social media every night. One evening, I saw she was flying to Paris for Fashion Week. The caption read, "Dreams come true if you never look back." Those words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Never look back. As if looking back meant seeing me, and she couldn't bear that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how it all turned into this. I had worked my whole life to make sure she'd never feel forgotten, and yet here I was, invisible to my own child. I thought about calling her one last time, telling her everything I'd kept buried, the loneliness, the nights I cried, the way I still saved her old drawings in a box under my bed. But I didn't, because I knew what would happen. The call would ring once, twice, then voicemail, and I couldn't bear another silence. Instead, I started writing her letters again, dozens of them. Some were long, others short. I wrote about the weather, about my coworkers, about how proud I was. I never mailed them. I kept them stacked neatly in a drawer, tied with string. Maybe someday she'd come back, and I'd hand them to her. Maybe she'd read them and understand everything I never said. But fate had other plans. 2 months later, I was watching the local news when they announced a Women in Business conference coming to Cleveland. The guest speaker, Lily Porter. My heart stopped. It was only 3 hours away. I could take the bus, maybe even see her from the audience. I imagined standing there, clapping for her, maybe catching her eyes just once. Maybe she'd see me and remember. I knew it was foolish, but that tiny hope burned brighter than anything else I had left. So I bought the ticket. I ironed my best blouse, the one I'd kept from her graduation. The day of the event, I woke up before sunrise, packed a small lunch, and caught the earliest bus. I sat by the window, clutching the old framed photo like a lucky charm. When I arrived, the convention hall was huge, glass walls, expensive cars parked outside, people in suits rushing in and out. I felt small, almost invisible among them, but I didn't care. I was just there to see my daughter. When she finally walked on stage, the crowd erupted. She looked stunning, confident, untouchable. She spoke about hard work, about believing in yourself even when no one else does. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone that someone did believe in her, me. But I stayed quiet, just clapping softly from the back row, tears streaming down my face. After the talk, I waited near the exit. My heart was pounding. When she finally appeared, surrounded by cameras and assistants, I called her name. Once, twice. She turned for a second, our eyes met, and then she looked away. Her assistant whispered something, and they walked past me. I tried again, louder this time, but she kept walking, smiling for the cameras. I stood there, holding the framed photo against my chest as the doors closed behind her. That was the moment everything inside me shattered. After that day at the conference, the world didn't look the same anymore. The streets felt louder, the lights felt harsher, and the people around me looked like they were all moving forward while I was stuck in place. I took the late bus back home, sitting by the window as the city blurred past like a long dream I didn't belong to anymore. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my head the second our eyes met. There was no recognition in hers, just a polite indifference, the kind you give to strangers who step into your path for a second too long. I kept telling myself maybe she didn't see me clearly, maybe she was distracted, but deep inside I knew that wasn't true. She had looked right at me. She just chose not to remember. When I got home that night, I placed the photo frame on the kitchen table. The glass had cracked slightly from the trip, splitting right between our faces. It felt like the universe's cruel little metaphor. I sat there staring at that fracture for hours, until the room grew dark and quiet. Then I cried the kind of tears that don't make any sound. I didn't even know who I was crying for anymore. For her, for myself, or for the years I had lost trying to give her everything. The next morning, I went to work as if nothing had happened. I smiled when customers asked for coffee refills, laughed at Jenny's jokes, pretended I wasn't breaking apart inside. But there were moments when the mask slipped, like when a young girl hugged her mother at one of the booths, or when someone mentioned a birthday surprise. Every small thing became a reminder of what I no longer had. I started staying longer after closing hours, wiping tables that were already clean just to avoid going home to that empty apartment. Bills started piling up faster than tips could cover them. My landlord taped another notice to the door. The heating bill doubled that month, and I had to choose between warmth and food. Most nights I picked tea and toast and told myself it was enough. I stopped watching TV because I couldn't bear to see her face again in an ad or interview. It was easier to pretend she didn't exist than to be reminded that she did, just not with me in her world. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I passed a boutique window and froze. There it was, one of her designs displayed on a mannequin, with her name printed on a golden tag below it. People were admiring it, taking photos. I stood there in the cold watching strangers praise my daughter while none of them would ever know who stitched her first dress. I remembered those nights when she sat beside me at the kitchen table, cutting fabric with tiny scissors, giggling because I couldn't thread the needle right. Now she was the face of a dream I helped build, and I wasn't even allowed to stand in its shadow. That night, I went home and opened the drawer where I kept all those letters I'd written to to her. I untied the string and started reading them one by one. Each letter felt like a piece of me. The hope, the pride, the exhaustion, the love. I realized something as I read through them. Every letter began with the same two words. I miss your voice. I miss your laugh. I miss hearing about your day. I miss knowing who you are. By the time I reached the last one, my tears had blurred the ink. I folded them back carefully, tied them again, and whispered, I miss myself too. Days turned into weeks, and I started disappearing from the world little by little. I stopped answering calls, stopped showing up for Sunday potlucks my coworkers invited me to, stopped doing anything that reminded me there was still life beyond this ache. I would come home, heat a can of soup, and sit in silence while the world outside went on without me. There was a strange comfort in that silence. It didn't ask questions. It didn't judge. It just existed, like a companion I never asked for but had learned to live with. One night, I found myself scrolling through her page again even though I promised I wouldn't. This time, it wasn't about curiosity. It was about longing. She had posted a photo from an awards ceremony, holding a trophy that said Entrepreneur of the Year. Her caption read, grateful for everyone who believed in me. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Everyone who believed in me. I wondered if she remembered the woman who once worked through fevers to pay her tuition. The woman who believed in her before the world even knew her name. The one who still believed even now when there was nothing left to believe in. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat there, still, until the sun came up. Something inside me had gone quiet. Not numb, not angry, just empty. It was the kind of emptiness that comes when your heart finally accepts what your mind has known for a while. She was never coming back. At least, not the girl I raised. The woman she became had no space for me in her story. Over the next few weeks, I started packing away reminders of her. The childhood drawings on the fridge, the prom photo, the graduation tassel, all of it went into a box that I sealed and pushed into the back of the closet. I didn't throw them away because that would mean giving up, but I couldn't keep seeing them either. I needed to breathe again. I needed to remember who I was before my life became a waiting room for her love. But even as I tried to move forward, life found small ways to keep her near. A coworker mentioned seeing her in a magazine. A customer complimented her brand without knowing who I was. Every reminder was a quiet bruise. Still, I learned to smile through it. People thought I was strong, but the truth was, I was just tired of breaking in public. One Sunday evening, I walked to the park with a thermos of coffee. I sat on a bench near the pond where she used to feed ducks as a child. The air smelled like rain, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined her small hand in mine again. I whispered, you used to laugh so hard when they chased you. I smiled at the memory. Then I realized something. That memory was mine alone now. She might never think of it again, but it still belonged to me. And somehow, that thought didn't hurt as much as it used to. That was the night I decided to stop waiting. I didn't stop loving her. I don't think a mother ever can. But I stopped waiting for the version of her who would turn around and say, I remember everything. Because maybe she never will. Maybe her story needed forgetting to feel complete. And maybe mine needed remembering to finally heal. Weeks turned into months, and I had started to rebuild my life quietly, almost invisibly. I focused on myself, on the tiny things that reminded me I was still here. I started going for morning walks, even when the cold made my lungs ache, and I discovered a small coffee shop near my apartment where the barista knew my name and asked about my day. The familiarity, the human connection, it felt like a lifeline. I even signed up for evening art classes at the community center, sketching landscapes and still lives I had never thought I had time for before. Every stroke of the pencil was a quiet rebellion against the emptiness that had once swallowed me whole. I was learning to breathe again without waiting for her. And then it came. The message that ripped open the fragile walls I had built around my heart. It was from her email address, the one she had used when she was little, the one I had kept after all these years. The subject line was simple, just her name, but my chest felt like it had been slammed with a heavy door. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend it didn't exist, to keep the fragile peace I had managed to create. But another part, the part that had always loved her unconditionally, demanded that I read it. Her words were polite at first, almost rehearsed. She wrote about her new life, the success, the friends, the opportunities. She mentioned how grateful she was to everyone who had supported her journey. And then she asked for a favor. She wanted me to send something. Not money, not gifts, just my presence at an event she was hosting. It was formal, professional, but the implication hit me like a storm. She needed me now, after all these years of absence, after all the birthdays I had spent alone, after all the nights I had cried silently in my apartment. I sat there with my hands shaking, rereading the message over and over. Anger bubbled up first. How dare she reach out now when she had spent years ignoring me, erasing me from her world. My first instinct was to throw my phone across the room, to scream into the void, to remind her that love wasn't a trophy she could pick up when convenient. But underneath that anger was something softer, something that refused to let go entirely. I was still her mother. I had loved her first, loved her longest, loved her when she didn't know how to love herself. myself, and somehow that love still mattered even if she had forgotten it. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. I spent hours pacing my apartment, looking at the stacks of letters I had written her and never sent, wondering what had gone wrong. I thought about every birthday I had stayed up late, every meal I had skipped, every tear I had swallowed so she could have a better life. And suddenly, all of it felt like invisible labor, the kind that only a mother knows, the kind that builds a person quietly and is never acknowledged. The injustice of it made me weep again, but this time the tears were different. They weren't only for her absence, they were for the recognition that sometimes love is not returned in the ways you expect. I spent that night writing down my feelings in my journal, pouring everything onto the page, the hurt, the betrayal, the longing, and even the tiny flicker of hope that maybe this time, things could be different. By the morning, I realized I had a choice. I could respond, attend the event, and put myself in a position where I might be hurt again. Or I could stay away, protect the fragile peace I had fought so hard to rebuild, and continue my life quietly. Both options were terrifying. One promised confrontation, the other loneliness. When I finally replied, I did so with caution. I kept my words short, formal, almost cold, though my heart was pounding. I thanked her for the invitation but didn't commit. I wanted her to understand that my love was unconditional but that my dignity was not negotiable. I didn't want to be another convenience in her story, a presence she could call on when she needed validation. I wanted to be seen, truly seen, not just as her mother, but as a person who had lived, suffered, and still carried love that had never wavered. For days after sending that email, I felt the old familiar ache of waiting. The silence was heavier than ever. Every ping of my phone made my stomach lurch. I kept imagining her walking through the door, looking at me and finally remembering every sacrifice, every moment of love. And then I realized something that scared me more than her rejection ever could. I wasn't waiting for her anymore. I was waiting to see if she could meet me where I was, not just pull me back into the orbit of her life. In the quiet moments, I thought about how our relationship had changed. I remembered the nights I had sewn her prom dress, the mornings I had carried her to the kitchen with sleepy eyes, the countless hours spent reassuring her that the world could be kind. All of it had built a foundation, not for her recognition, but for her life. And now, years later, I realized that foundation had made her who she was. She had everything because I had given everything. But giving everything didn't guarantee gratitude. It didn't guarantee love in return. I started walking again in the mornings, carrying a sense of clarity that hadn't existed before. I realized that life was moving, with or without her. And if she wanted to step back into my world, it had to be on terms of respect, not just convenience. I could still love her. I could still care. But I would not bend myself to fill a void she had chosen to leave empty. That recognition became a quiet strength, one that didn't roar but simply existed. Then one day, a letter arrived in the mail. It was handwritten, a rarity in the world of instant texts and emails. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from her. Not long, not elaborate, but the words cut through me in a way I wasn't prepared for. She apologized, vaguely, for not being present, for forgetting the small moments, and she asked if I could meet her for coffee the following week. She wrote that she wanted to reconnect, wanted to see me not as her mother who worked tirelessly in the past, but as the woman I had become on my own. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my chest. My first instinct was disbelief, my second was anger, and my third, the one I listened to, was something I hadn't felt in a long time, cautious hope. I didn't know if I could trust her, if I could bear the possibility of being forgotten again. But I knew one thing. I had survived this long without her attention. I had built a life that was mine, and I would not surrender it for the sake of nostalgia or guilt. That week, I continued my routines with a strange mix of anticipation and fear. I prepared myself not for a reunion that healed every wound, but for a meeting that might finally give clarity. I realized that the years of silence had taught me something invaluable. Love was not measured by recognition or gratitude. Love was a river that flowed whether the recipient drank from it or not. And now, for the first time in years, I was ready to decide how much of that river I would share, and how much I would keep flowing for myself. And so I waited for her, not with desperation, not with pleading, but with a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed before. I was ready to see her, not to beg for acknowledgement, but to stand in my own dignity, to meet the daughter who had everything and remember the woman who had given it all. After sending the cautious reply and receiving her handwritten note, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope between hope and fear. I spent the days before our meeting preparing myself, not with makeup or fancy clothes, but with mental armor. I reminded myself of every year I had endured alone, every sacrifice I had made, and every quiet victory I had won while waiting for a daughter who had seemed to forget me entirely. I told myself that love could survive absence, but dignity could not be compromised. I would not let her presence, no matter how heartfelt, diminish the life I had built quietly in her absence. The morning of our meeting, I woke before sunrise. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sipped it on my small balcony while the first rays of light stretched across the city. I thought about the woman I had been, exhausted, lonely, almost almost invisible, and the woman I had become, resilient, composed, and quietly powerful. I put on the jacket I liked the most, not to impress her, but to remind myself that I deserved to be seen, that I was worthy of respect regardless of her choices. I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early, choosing a corner table where I could see the door and observe her entrance. The city moved around me, people rushing to jobs and errands, oblivious to the storm of emotions in my chest. I held the old letters I had written her in my purse, a secret reminder of the years of love that had been unacknowledged. I told myself that these letters were for me, not for her. They were proof that I had given everything, proof that I had survived the silence, proof that my love was relentless even without recognition. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She was the same face I had loved, yet molded by time and ambition into someone almost foreign. She scanned the room and froze for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that spoke of memory, but quickly she recovered. She approached the table with the confidence of someone used to attention and acclaim. I noticed her eyes flicker briefly to my corner, and I felt a pang, the first small crack in my armor. But I kept my posture steady, my hands folded neatly on the table, a quiet signal that I was here, present but not pliable. We ordered coffee, and for the first few minutes, conversation was polite but superficial. She spoke about her work, her friends, the endless travel. I listened and nodded, letting her words flow over me while I measured my own response carefully. I wanted her to understand that I was present without begging for acknowledgement, that my love was unwavering, but my patience had limits. I shared small updates about my own life, about the art classes I had joined and the friends I had made, subtly demonstrating that I was no longer defined by her absence, but by the life I had built for myself. As the conversation continued, I realized that my strength was not in anger or resentment, but in quiet composure. I let her speak, even when her words hurt, even when she casually mentioned milestones she had achieved without me. I refused to show the cracks that had haunted me for years. Each moment of restraint was a reclamation of my own dignity. I wasn't there to remind her of what she had forgotten. I was there to remind myself that I could stand firm and whole, independent of her recognition. After an hour, there was a brief lull in the conversation, and I took a deep breath. I told her, gently but firmly, that while I was proud of her accomplishments, I could not erase the years of silence and neglect with a single meeting. She looked startled, as if she had expected immediate forgiveness, immediate reconnection. But I remained calm, knowing that real love does not demand instant acknowledgement. It waits, it tests, and it honors boundaries. I could see the shift in her expression, the realization that the mother she had taken for granted was no longer waiting to be recalled at her convenience. The meeting ended shortly after, with a tentative agreement to continue communication, but under new terms. I would remain in her life, yes, but on my own terms, guided by respect and mutual effort, not obligation. Walking out of the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of control that I had never experienced before. For the first time in years, I was interacting with my daughter not as someone desperate for acknowledgement, but as a woman who had survived, endured, and claimed her own space in the world. In the following weeks, I continued to cultivate this quiet strength. I returned to my morning walks, my art classes, and the small joys I had discovered before she reached out. I allowed myself to care for her, to respond to her messages, but I refused to sacrifice my own peace. Every interaction became a lesson in patience, resilience, and dignity. I had learned that love alone was not enough to protect me from heartbreak, but boundaries, self-respect, and deliberate choices could. This period of calm, of quiet reclamation, became the foundation for the next chapter of my life. I realized that revenge did not always need to be loud or vengeful. Sometimes the most profound statement was living fully and refusing to be diminished by someone who had once erased you. I was no longer the mother waiting by the phone, crushed by silence and absence. I was a woman who had survived invisibility and emerged with a strength that no success or neglect could take away. And though the wound of being forgotten would never fully disappear, it became a scar I wore with pride. A scar that reminded me of every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every moment of pure, relentless love that had shaped not only my daughter's life but my own journey towards self-discovery and empowerment. Life had settled into a strange rhythm after that coffee shop meeting. I had reclaimed a sense of control over my own days, my own emotions, and my own heart. Yet, just when I thought I had grown immune to disappointment, life decided to remind me that healing is never linear. It came in the form of a phone call from a mutual acquaintance, someone I hadn't seen in years but who had somehow stayed connected to her orbit of success. They spoke carefully, almost hesitantly, and when they finally revealed the news, my chest tightened as if someone had pressed a heavy weight against it. Lily's rise to fame and fortune had not been as clean as everyone assumed. Behind the glossy magazine covers, the social media posts, and the awards, there were choices I had never imagined she would make. She had accepted investments and partnerships from people whose ethics were questionable, whose influence was powerful but morally ambiguous. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my mug, staring into the faint steam, as if if the heat could somehow dissolve the truth I had just learned. My daughter, the girl I had nurtured and believed in unconditionally, had stepped into a world where compromises were made at the expense of integrity, and the person who had always been her moral compass was nowhere to be seen. The realization cut deeper than any absence ever could. It wasn't just that she had forgotten me. It was that she had built her empire without acknowledging the values I had instilled, the lessons I had taught, the quiet sacrifices I had made to keep her grounded. My heart ached as I thought of the years she had spent believing she could navigate the world alone, forgetting that the foundation beneath her feet had been laid with love, discipline, and hard-earned lessons. I felt a bitter sting of betrayal, not in the conventional sense of deceit, but in the way life itself had twisted, allowing her to forget the woman who had given everything. For days, I oscillated between sadness and anger, the emotions tumbling over each other like a storm without a pause. I replayed our past interactions in my mind, the small moments I had clung to for comfort, and wondered how they had been erased so completely. I thought of the gifts I had sent, the letters I had written and never mailed, the countless nights I had stayed awake worrying about her future. She had taken all of that love and used it as a stepping stone into a world that now seemed foreign, cold, and distant. And yet, beneath the hurt, a strange clarity emerged. I realized that my power did not lie in her acknowledgement, but in the quiet truth of what I had done and what I had endured. The tipping point came when I accidentally discovered a series of posts she had shared privately with her inner circle. They were photos from a gala, behind-the-scenes images of deals being made, and comments that hinted at dismissing anyone from her past who might slow her momentum. I read the words over and over, each repetition a punch to my chest. My daughter had built everything she had dreamed of, but in doing so, she had carefully constructed a world where I did not exist. The woman who had worked through illness, exhaustion, and heartbreak to build her dreams had been erased. My first instinct was rage, to confront, to demand recognition, but I reminded myself of the strength I had cultivated. There was power in restraint, in dignity, in surviving without validation. I spent the next week reflecting quietly, letting the truth settle into its proper place. I stopped imagining her calls or her apologies. I stopped waiting for moments that might never come. Instead, I focused on myself, on rebuilding my home, exploring new hobbies, and nurturing the friendships that had weathered time and distance. I realized that the only control I truly had was over my own life and reactions. Her choices were hers, but my peace was mine to claim. In a way, this revelation, painful as it was, became a turning point. I understood that love could coexist with disappointment, that hope could coexist with disillusionment, and that dignity could coexist with heartbreak. One evening, while sketching a still life in my art class, I felt a strange sense of calm. The pencil traced lines across the paper, forming shapes that were imperfect but real, much like my own life. I thought about Lily and the world she had chosen, the people she had surrounded herself with, and the heights she had reached. I also thought about the years I had given, the lessons I had taught, and the unwavering love that had quietly endured. That love was mine. It was untouchable, independent of her recognition, and it reminded me that I had survived every storm life had thrown my way. Then came a turning point I had not expected. I received an invitation to a charity event, not from her, but from one of the organizations she had collaborated with. The envelope was crisp, the font elegant, and it addressed me personally. Inside was a note expressing gratitude for my influence on a young designer, an acknowledgement that I had somehow shaped a life that had impacted the community. It was subtle, understated, and perhaps overlooked by many, but to me, it was seismic. For the first time, someone from her world had recognized the woman who had nurtured and supported her from the shadows. I held the note in my hands for hours, feeling warmth spread through my chest, realizing that even when someone forgets you, the world can still remember. I knew then that revenge did not have to be dramatic or loud. It could be quiet, composed, and unshakable. The acknowledgement, however small, was enough to validate the years of sacrifice, the nights of tears, and the moments of despair. I realized that power was not in making her feel guilt or shame, but in standing tall, living fully, and allowing the truth of my resilience to shine in ways she could not control. The lesson was clear. I could not force her to remember, but I could make sure that my life, my choices, and my dignity were undeniable. By the end of that week, I had decided on a plan, not to confront, not to argue, but to live deliberately in a way that affirmed my value. I would attend events, build my career quietly, nurture my passions, and allow the world to see the woman I had become. I would not let the years of neglect define me. Every sketch, every morning walk, every moment of quiet reflection became part of my strategy to reclaim space in a world that had attempted to erase me. I would not ask for recognition from her. I would create it for myself. That night, I held the stack of letters I had written her over the years and placed them in a box labeled with her name. It was not an act of closure, but a reminder of the love that had never faltered. I knew that one day, perhaps she might stumble across them and understand. But even if she never did, the act of preserving them was enough. My story, my love, and my resilience existed independently of her memory. memory. That was the quiet power I had been searching for all along. The hidden truths about her rise, the choices she had made, and the world she now inhabited became fuel for my own growth. I no longer measured my worth by her acknowledgement or absence. I realized that every moment I had endured, every tear I had shed, and every act of love I had given had built a foundation stronger than anything she could acquire through fame or fortune. I was no longer invisible. I was standing in the center of my own life, unwavering, untouchable, and quietly victorious. After discovering the hidden truths about my daughter's rise, I knew that sitting quietly would no longer suffice. I had spent years surviving her absence, allowing it to shape the boundaries of my life without realizing that I had the power to redraw them. Slowly, deliberately, I began to take control of my own world, not out of anger, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. My apartment became a sanctuary where I could breathe freely, where my life was defined by my choices, not by the presence or absence of someone who had once erased me. I started small, with routines that were mine alone. Morning walks became longer, and I discovered hidden streets and parks I had never noticed. I joined a book club at the library, a group of women who shared stories of resilience, heartbreak, and hope. The conversations, simple and raw, reminded me that I was not alone in my experiences. I felt seen in ways that I hadn't in years, and it reminded me that connection did not have to be tied to my daughter's approval or attention. It was life unfolding around me, and I had the right to participate fully. The letters I had written to Lily became part of a ritual rather than a prison. Each evening, I would take one and read it aloud to myself, acknowledging the love I had given without expecting anything in return. It was a strange comfort to hear my own voice, to let the words of pride, sacrifice, and devotion linger in the room. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed, but every reading strengthened the invisible thread between the past and the woman I was becoming. The act of honoring those memories allowed me to reclaim ownership of my narrative, to assert that my love had meaning even if it was not recognized externally. I also began to set emotional boundaries. When her messages arrived, asking for advice, sharing fleeting updates, or occasionally apologizing, I responded with careful neutrality. I listened, but I did not bend. I offered guidance if it was requested, but I refused to be drawn into the cycles of guilt or expectation. Each measured response was a declaration of self-respect. I was no longer the mother waiting by the phone, desperate for acknowledgement. I was a woman choosing when and how to allow her daughter into her life, preserving my dignity above all. Work became another place where I reclaimed my space. The diner, once a constant reminder of struggle, became a stage for subtle mastery. I trained new staff, organized schedules, and introduced small efficiencies that improved operations. Each action, though ordinary in appearance, reinforced my sense of competence and self-worth. I noticed the pride in the eyes of my coworkers, the gratitude for my guidance, and I realized that influence did not have to come from wealth or fame. It came from consistency, patience, and presence, qualities I had refined through years of quiet endurance. I also started writing again, this time in a journal dedicated to self-reflection rather than letters to my daughter. I chronicled my days, my insights, and the subtle victories that often went unnoticed. These writings became a mirror, allowing me to see the strength that had been forming quietly beneath the surface. Each entry was a testament to survival, to love without attachment, and to the realization that life could flourish even in the shadow of heartbreak. I felt a sense of liberation I had never known, the kind that comes when you stop defining yourself through the lens of someone else's recognition. One evening, I attended a local art exhibit displaying some of my own sketches. The walls were lined with works from community members, each telling a story of struggle, hope, and triumph. I stood before my pieces, noticing how they reflected not only skill but the emotional journey I had undergone. People stopped to compliment my work, asking questions about technique and inspiration. I realized in that moment that my life had depth beyond the absence of her attention, that my achievements, no matter how small, were valid, valuable, and worthy of acknowledgement. Yet, the quietest victories were the most profound. I began to forgive myself for the years I had spent waiting, for the nights of tears, and for the moments I had doubted my worth. I allowed myself to embrace joy, to laugh at small things, to nurture friendships that offered warmth without expectation. Each day became a reclamation of agency, a reaffirmation that I could live fully regardless of her choices. I had learned that strength was not measured by the absence of pain, but by the ability to move through it with grace, dignity, and intentionality. And through it all, I realized the subtle form of power I had cultivated. I no longer needed her validation. I did not need to witness acknowledgement to know that I had built something enduring in her life and in my own. I could stand in the room, walk through the streets, or sip my coffee in quiet cafes, and know that my worth was not contingent upon her memory. The woman who had been erased had returned, not seeking revenge, not seeking apology, but simply existing as fully and uncompromisingly as she had always deserved to. By the end of this period, the world felt different. I had learned that love could be both fierce and silent, that patience could be a form of resistance, and that dignity could outshine any betrayal. My daughter had everything, but I had something deeper, a life rebuilt on my terms, a heart that had survived profound absence, and a mind sharpened by years of careful observation and reflection. The quiet countermove had succeeded not through confrontation, but through the deliberate act of reclaiming my own space and refusing to be diminished. I knew that our paths might cross again, that future moments could reopen old wounds, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned to stand in my own truth, to embrace the love I had given and continue giving without expectation, and to recognize that real strength is born not from victories imposed on others, but from the quiet, relentless assertion of your own life. And in that strength, I found peace, resilience, and a subtle triumph that no success, fame, or fortune could ever erase. The day finally arrived when our worlds collided again in a space that was neither hers nor mine, yet demanded a reckoning. She had invited me to a small gallery opening, a showcase for rising designers, and I realized this was the moment she had been leading up to, consciously or unconsciously. I walked in early, letting the ambient music, the chatter, and the faint smell of varnish and paint settle over me like a soft cloak. I took a seat near the corner, observing the room, the people, and the life I had once imagined sharing with her. The difference now was that I was not waiting for validation. I was simply present, whole, and aware of the subtle power I carried within me. When she arrived, she was radiant, effortlessly drawing the attention of everyone around her. Yet for the first time, I noticed the slight hesitation in her eyes when they met mine. She had grown into a woman of success, of visibility, of influence. Yet the child who had once held my hand in the park and laughed at the ducks seemed to flicker behind the polished surface. I did not reach for her, did not soften my gaze, but simply let her see me fully. Not the woman she remembered, not the mother she had neglected, but the woman I had become through endurance, patience, and quiet reclamation. As the evening unfolded, she approached with a tentative smile, a gesture that was polite yet loaded with unspoken tension. I stood, meeting her halfway, and for a brief moment, silence spoke louder than words could. In that silence, the weight of years of absence, neglect, and longing pressed upon us both. I could feel her hesitation, the subtle acknowledgement that she had once erased me from her story, and I realized that this confrontation did not need dramatics to be devastatingly effective. Sometimes, the quiet assertion of presence carries more power than anger or reproach. We exchanged pleasantries, careful, measured words that floated over the background of laughter and music. She mentioned her projects, her travels, her achievements, all the markers of the life she had built while I remained invisible. I listened, nodding, letting her speak fully without interruption, and I felt a strange satisfaction in the act of restraint. Every word she spoke was a reminder of what I had endured and what I had survived. I did not need to remind her of it. My calm composure, my quiet dignity, spoke volumes on their own. Then came the moment of unspoken truth. She asked about my life, about the changes I had made, about the art, the walks, the mornings I spent in quiet reflection. Her curiosity was polite, but it revealed something deeper, a subtle recognition that I had lived, that I had thrived, and that I was no longer defined solely by her memory of me. I answered honestly, each sentence measured, reflecting both pride and restraint. I shared the small victories, the regained confidence, and the quiet triumphs of surviving years of neglect. I could see the flicker of realization cross her face, the understanding that the mother she had forgotten had not only endured but flourished. As we continued, I noticed the shift in her demeanor. She was no longer the untouchable figure of success. She was a daughter confronting the echoes of her absence, a young woman beginning to recognize the depth of the love she had taken for granted. I did not push, did not demand acknowledgement, but I allowed my presence, my quiet strength, to fill the space between us. Every glance, every measured gesture, every calm response was a declaration that I was no longer waiting to be remembered. I was claiming my own place in her life and in the world around me. The climax of the evening came unexpectedly. A colleague of hers mentioned the influence of a mentor in shaping her work. The conversation paused, the room seemed to shrink, and her gaze met mine. I realized then that recognition, when unforced, carried a gravity that no apology could match. She had begun to see me not as an accessory to her success, but as a foundational presence whose absence had left a tangible void. The moment was quiet, subtle, and profoundly moving. No raised voices, no dramatics, just the undeniable weight of truth finally acknowledged. After the gallery closed, we stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city lights reflected on wet pavement, the remnants of an earlier rain glistening like scattered diamonds. She hesitated before speaking, and when she did, it was measured, tentative, yet sincere. I listened without judgment, absorbing the tone, the vulnerability, the awareness that she had begun to grasp the depth of her past neglect. My heart beat steadily, a mixture of relief, lingering sadness, and the subtle triumph of knowing that I had survived, that I had endured, and that I had emerged unbroken. Walking home that night, I felt a strange sense of closure, though I knew the journey was far from over. The confrontation had not erased years of absence, nor had it fully healed the wounds, but it had shifted the balance. I realized that the most profound victories are are often quiet, carried in moments of presence, composure, and self-respect. I had faced the daughter who had forgotten me, and I had not crumbled. I had not begged. I had simply existed, fully and unwaveringly, a living testament to the love, endurance, and strength that had shaped us both. The night became a turning point. I no longer felt the weight of anticipation or the paralysis of hope deferred. I had reclaimed my dignity, my space, and my power, and I understood that the future would be defined not by her choices, but by the steady assertion of my own life. I could still love her, care for her, and guide her when appropriate, but I would no longer allow her absence to dictate my worth. I had discovered the quiet truth of resilience, that the deepest impact is made not through confrontation, but through the unwavering presence of a life lived fully, regardless of recognition. And as I lay in bed that night, the city humming softly beyond my window, I finally allowed myself a sense of peace. I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and years of neglect. I had discovered the hidden strength within me, reclaimed my space, and confronted the daughter who had forgotten me with dignity, grace, and quiet power. The chapter of confrontation had closed not with drama or shouting, but with the subtle force of unwavering presence. And in that presence, I knew that I had finally begun to reclaim the life that was always mine to claim. After the quiet confrontation at the gallery, my life settled into a rhythm that felt foreign and comforting at the same time. I had faced my daughter, observed her acknowledgement without demanding it, and in doing so, I had discovered a strength I had never fully realized. The city outside my window seemed sharper, brighter, and less intimidating. I began to notice small details I had overlooked in my years of waiting: the laughter of children in the park, the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the way sunlight glimmered through the leaves in early autumn. Each moment became a reminder that life continued, and I had every right to live fully within it. I focused on cultivating boundaries that protected my heart while still leaving room for love. I responded to her messages with care, listening when she shared victories, struggles, or fleeting regrets, but I no longer allowed myself to be drawn into cycles of guilt or emotional exhaustion. The old ache of longing persisted at times, but it was quieter now, tempered by the realization that my value was not contingent on her recognition. I could still be present in her life without losing myself in the process, and that distinction became my anchor. The letters I had written her over the years, once tokens of yearning and unfulfilled hope, became a private testament to the depth of my resilience. I read them occasionally, allowing the memories and emotions to flow freely, acknowledging both the pain and the love that had endured. I realized that these letters, though never sent, had shaped my journey and reminded me that I had survived neglect, heartbreak, and disappointment without losing the core of who I was. The act of remembering became a quiet celebration of my own strength. At work, I noticed a subtle shift as well. The diner, once just a source of income and routine, became a space of influence and subtle mastery. I implemented small changes that improved efficiency, and colleagues began seeking my advice, valuing my experience and perspective. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of authority and competence that was entirely my own. I was no longer invisible or overlooked. My presence mattered, my skills mattered, and my voice carried weight. These small victories, though unnoticed by my daughter, became monumental in the quiet reconstruction of my self-worth. I also returned to art, pouring myself into sketches and paintings that reflected my emotional journey. Each piece carried layers of memory, heartbreak, and triumph. Exhibiting my work at local galleries became a source of pride and affirmation, not because my daughter could see it, but because I had created something tangible, a reflection of my resilience and personal growth. Friends and strangers alike acknowledged the beauty and honesty in my work, and for the first time in years, I felt the validation that had eluded me, grounded in authenticity rather than obligation. Social media, which had once been a source of anxiety and comparison, became a tool of quiet empowerment. I shared glimpses of my art, my morning walks, and the small joys of life rebuilt, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I had a story worth telling and a life worth living. I curated my online presence with care, reflecting a life of strength and dignity rather than longing or resentment. Each post became a declaration that I existed fully, not as an extension of someone else's success, but as a person whose experiences and choices carried weight. Evenings became a sacred time for reflection and mindfulness. I would sit on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker and listening to the distant hum of traffic, acknowledging both the pain of the past and the growth that had emerged from it. I allowed myself to grieve the years lost, the moments she had forgotten, and the absence that had shaped so much of my life. But alongside that grief, I cultivated gratitude for my survival, for the love I had given unconditionally, and for the resilience that had carried me through each storm. The act of reflection became both healing and empowering. The most profound transformation, however, was internal. I no longer measured my worth by her recognition or absence. I no longer waited for validation from someone who had once forgotten me. I had learned that love and self-respect could coexist, that one could care deeply without surrendering one's dignity. I had claimed my space, my voice, and my presence chance in the world. I had survived betrayal and heartbreak and emerged stronger, calmer, and more grounded than I had ever imagined possible. The quiet strength I had cultivated became my compass, guiding me through interactions with her and with the world. And as our intermittent conversations continued, I realized something remarkable. She was beginning to meet me halfway, not out of obligation, but out of genuine recognition. The dynamic had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Where once I had been erased and ignored, now I existed as a force she could acknowledge without diminishing her own achievements. The balance had been restored, not through drama or confrontation, but through the deliberate cultivation of dignity, resilience, and emotional boundaries. I had not needed to demand respect or validation. I had simply lived my truth, and it had reshaped our connection in ways she could not have orchestrated. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the lessons the journey had taught me. Love is not possession, recognition is not obligation, and resilience is born through endurance, patience, and self-respect. I had learned to give without expectation, to protect my heart without retreating from life, and to find joy and fulfillment independently of anyone else's acknowledgement. And while the wound of being forgotten would never fully disappear, it had transformed into a source of strength, a reminder of how far I had come, and a testament to the quiet power of a life reclaimed. By the time our relationship settled into its new rhythm, I had learned the true meaning of resilience, patience, and self-respect. The daughter who had once forgotten me was no longer the sole center of my emotional world. I had built a life that was independent, rich in small victories, friendships, and moments of quiet joy. I still loved her deeply, as I always had, but my love no longer demanded recognition, apology, or reciprocity. It was free, unshackled by expectation, and that freedom gave me a sense of peace I had never known before. We continued to see each other occasionally, meeting for coffee or attending local exhibitions, but each interaction was measured, deliberate, and grounded in mutual respect. I no longer felt the old anxiety of waiting for a call or a message. Instead, I approached each encounter with calm curiosity, allowing her presence to be part of my life without defining it. I realized that boundaries were not walls, but bridges, subtle, flexible, and strong enough to allow connection without vulnerability to pain. The balance was delicate, but it was ours to maintain, and I finally felt that I could do so without fear. In these months, I discovered the depth of my own growth. I had started volunteering at a local community center, mentoring young women who faced challenges similar to those I had endured. I shared my story, not as a lesson or a caution, but as evidence that survival, resilience, and dignity are possible even when life seems unfair. The gratitude in their eyes, the spark of recognition in their expressions, reminded me that my life had impact beyond my daughter. I had influence, strength, and presence, and it no longer depended on her acknowledgement. I also returned to my personal passions, dedicating time to painting, writing, and quiet walks in the parks I had discovered long ago. Each small activity became a meditation, a celebration of the life I had claimed for myself. I had learned that joy is not contingent upon someone else's presence, that love can exist alongside disappointment, and that strength is cultivated through patience, reflection, and deliberate choices. I felt a profound gratitude for the woman I had become, molded by years of absence, heartache, and ultimately, self-discovery. When my daughter spoke of her successes now, I could listen without envy, without fear, without the old ache of longing. I could feel pride in her achievements while maintaining my own identity, and that was perhaps the greatest transformation of all. I no longer defined myself by her memory or recognition, and yet I could still care deeply. Love, I realized, was not about possession or obligation. It was about acceptance, endurance, and the courage to allow someone to exist in your life without demanding they fill the emptiness they once left behind. One evening, as I walked through the streets near my apartment, the city lights reflecting off puddles from a recent rain, I felt a rare sense of completion. The journey from despair to quiet triumph had been long, painful, and at times almost unbearable, but it had shaped me into someone I was proud to be. I had learned that life does not always grant closure in the form we expect. Sometimes, closure comes quietly, through steady growth, dignity, and the ability to reclaim one's own story. The final lesson was simple yet profound. We cannot control the choices of those we love, nor can we demand recognition for the sacrifices we make. What we can control is our response, our boundaries, and our willingness to live fully despite betrayal, absence, and heartbreak. I had chosen to love, to endure, and to live boldly. In doing so, I had discovered a peace that was entirely my own, a strength that no absence could diminish, and a dignity that could never be stolen. As I sit here today, reflecting on the years of silence, absence, and eventual reconnection, I feel a quiet pride. I survived the emptiness, navigated betrayal, and emerged with a life that was vibrant, meaningful, and entirely mine. My daughter may have forgotten me once, may have taken my presence for granted, but I had remembered myself. And in remembering myself, I had found the most profound form of reconciliation, not with her, but with the woman I had become. I now understand that love does not always arrive with validation. validation, and forgiveness does not always require acknowledgement. Life teaches us through absence as much as through presence, and the moments we endure in solitude shape the character we carry forward. I had endured, and I had thrived. The years of waiting, the nights of tears, the moments of despair, all of it became the foundation for a life lived with integrity, purpose, and strength. And so I continue, each day a deliberate choice to live fully, love without expectation, and honor my own journey. My daughter may still stumble, forget, or falter, but I am no longer dependent on her memory to validate my worth. I have learned the quiet art of resilience, the subtle power of dignity, and the enduring strength of a love that survives even when it is unacknowledged. Life, I have discovered, is not about being remembered. It is about remembering yourself, standing firm, and moving forward with grace and courage.